not to heavy storytelling. We are going to be reading a story, but first we are going to be reading the Bible, and then we're going to be doing the synopsis, and then we're going to be reading Miracle on 34th Street. Hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, and let me know the video. Let's get right into it.
Hello! So we decided to go ahead and finish tonight. So that way we don't have any hangovers and we can just get all the suspense done for this book, and we can watch the movie this weekend, and I recommend that everybody do it. And now we're on verse 153 of Psalm 119. Thank you, one person, for joining me. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. Let me begin. Look on my affliction and deliver me, for I do not forget your law. Plead my cause and redeem me. Give me life according to your promise. Salvation is far from the wicked, for they do not seek your statutes. Great is your mercy, O Lord. Give me life according to your rules. Many are my persecutors and my adversaries, but I do not swerve from your testimonies. I look at the faithless with disgust, because they do not keep your commands. Consider how I love your precepts. Give me life according to your steadfast love. The sum of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous rules endures forever. Princes persecute me without cause, but my heart stands in awe of your words. I rejoice at your word like one who finds great spoil. I hate and abhor falsehood, but I love your law. 7 times a day I praise you for your righteous rules. Great peace have those who love your law. Nothing can make them stumble. I hope for your salvation, O Lord, and I do your commandments. My soul keeps your testimonies. I love them exceedingly. I keep your precepts and testimonies, for all my ways are before you. Let my cry come before you, O Lord. Give me understanding according to your word. Let my plea come before you. Deliver me according to your word. My lips will pour forth praise, for you teach me your statutes. My tongue will sing of your word, for all your commandments are right. Let your hand be ready to help me, for I have chosen your precepts. I long for your salvation, O Lord, and your law is my delight. Let my soul live and praise you, and let your rules help me. I have gone astray like a lost sheep. Seek your servant, for I do not forget your commandments. And that is the end of Psalm 119. So I hope that that has been a blessing to you to actually get to read the whole psalm. Obviously, it's broken up into those 6 sections, but you can go back and listen to them individually or all together if you want to, and I'm okay with you doing that. I think God will be too. All right, so now we're on chapter 16. Of course, we just finished reading the last section, so that should be good and fresh in our memories. And what happened in that section was that Kris Kringle was on trial, and the judge thought that it was going to be a great idea to put him on trial. His advisor said, hey, this is top notch. You need to condemn this guy. The judge immediately said, Santa Claus is condemned. He's going to the asylum, and that's where he will stay for all his days. I'm a poet and didn't know it. And now here's Kimberly to say what really happened.
You sure you just read all that, Dad? Okay, the person who, sorry I wasn't here last live stream. I was arm deep in melted chocolate. But what happened was basically everybody's like, Santa Claus isn't real, blah 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 blah. like all the people who were in charge, and then there were a bunch of people who gave evidence on Santa Claus being real, saying, I believe in Santa Claus, I believe in Santa Claus. And even the owner, Mr. Macy, I think, said, yeah, I believe in Santa Claus. Do you want to know why? He thought, if I say I don't believe in Santa Claus, I'd be admitting that my Santa Claus is crazy. Yikes, I don't want to do that. It'd be bad business moves. So, that's happening, and they were able to prove Santa Claus was real. So, now all they need to prove is that Kris Kringle is Santa Claus. So they asked for a day to think about a new defense for this new topic. I'm going to hand it off to Dad, who's going to read us the rest of the story.
Okay, so what actually happened is that the state of New York conceded the existence of Santa Claus, which isn't exactly the same as proving that he's real, but at least they got the state of New York to concede that he was real. So, the way he did that was rather clever, and if you want more details on that, then go back and listen to the last video and you'll get all the details. So now we're on chapter 16. As I said earlier, the first word is when. We're all going to sit quietly. Okay, good. Somebody's holding their breath, so I know that's going to be quiet. So now we're on chapter 16. Let me begin. When Doris came home that evening, Susan's first question was, "Is Mr. Kringle coming over tonight?" Doris was afraid not. "He hasn't been here for so long," said Susan. "Won't he come home soon, Mother?" Doris had read the newspaper's account of the day's events at the trial. The reporters were rooting hard for Mr. Kringle, but the outcome seemed inevitable. "Susan, Mr. Kringle may never be able to come here again," she said. "Why not?" "Well," Doris tried to explain, "it's because he says he's Santa Claus." "But he is Santa Claus, Mother. I know he is." "Some people don't believe that, Susan, so they're having sort of a trial." "But he must be Santa Claus," said Susan. "He's so sweet and kind and jolly, and nobody could be like Mr. Kringle except Santa Claus." "I think perhaps you're right," said Doris. "Is Mr. Kringle unhappy, Mother?" "I'm afraid he is, dear," Doris answered. "Then I'm going to write him a letter right away to cheer him up." Susan would not eat her supper until she had completed the letter. After supper, Doris helped her address the envelope to Mr. Kris Kringle, New York County Courthouse Center, and Pearl Streets, New York City. Susan rushed off to finish the game in another child's apartment. Doris promised to mail the letter right away. She read over it, smiling. Dear Mr. Kringle, I miss you very much, and I hope I will see you soon. I know it will come out all right. I believe you are Santa Claus, and I hope you are not sad. Yours truly, Susan Walker. Doris stood there thoughtfully a second. Then she added a footnote. I believe in you too, and signed it Doris. Quickly, she sealed the envelope and stamped it special delivery. Then she walked out into the hall and dropped it into the mail chute. Down at the main post office late that night, Al Golden was sorting the mail. Under his visor, he was scowling as he viciously chewed at his cigar. Christmas was wonderful. Al had kitties too, but Christmas mail was a big pain in the neck. It wasn't only the extra packages and letters. It was those letters to Santa Claus. There were literally thousands of them. They had bags and bags of it cluttering up the place. It had to be kept for 30 days, too. Some crazy old law. Suddenly, Al stopped sorting, and he held a letter in his hand. "Hey, here's a new one," he said as he picked up Susan's letter. "I've seen him write to Santa Claus at the North Pole, the South Pole, care of the postmaster, and every other way. But this kid writes to Mr. Kris Kringle, New York County Courthouse. Special delivery, too. Can you beat that?" "Sure, the kid's right. That's where he is, too," said Lou Spoletti, who was working next to Al. Don't you read the papers? Sure, Al read the papers. Lopez had KO'd Garcia in the 7th. Oh, I've never seen KO'd spelled that way. Yeah, it's knocked out, but usually nowadays you just you see just the letters KO, but this is spelled out KAYOED, KO'd. So at first I thought it was canoed, but it's not canoed. Lopez had KO'd Garcia in the 7th. They got him on trial down there, this Kringle guy, said Lou. He claims he's Santa Claus, and some DA claims he's nuts. Al looked very thoughtful as he threw Susan's letter in the downtown special delivery bag. You mean there's a guy who really might be Santa Claus? He asked. A lot of guys think he is, said Lou, nodding. Well, what's the matter with you, Lou? Said Al. You ain't very bright or something. This guy Kringle's the answer to our prayers. Geez, said Lou. Why didn't I think of that? Order a special big truck. Order a couple of 'em, said Al. Get 'em here right away. All the Santa Claus mail we got lying around here goes to Mr. Kris Kringle down at the courthouse. Chapter 17. In the judge's chambers the following afternoon, Charlie Hallerman was at his honor again. The publicity on the Kringle hearing had reached unheard-of heights. Why, they're writing big headlines about it. I've read the papers, too, said Harper dryly. But what could he do? He had his position to think of, his duty toward his office. Charlie didn't care how he did it. He had to set Kringle free. Today's Christmas Eve, Henry, and if you sentence Santa Claus to a padded cell on Christmas Eve, you're liable to be picketed or mobbed or murdered. The judge was really desperate now. If that Gailey boy could only figure out the slightest possible pretext of a competent authority, the judge was willing and eager to give him every break. He had observed Mr. Kringle very carefully. He seemed to be nothing worse than a very kindly old gentleman, but unless something miraculous happened, he would have to accept the lunacy report and have the old man put away. Judge Harper put on his robe and entered the court. Fred was deeply worried as the trial resumed. The courtroom had grown tense, as if all present realized that the finale was at hand. Before long it would be Christmas Eve. In a few hours Santa Claus would be starting on his annual ride over the rooftops, or else. Fred had told Chris that he had tried desperately to obtain competent authority. He had wired the mayor, the governor, and many other officials, all to no avail. Mr. Mara was reading reports from various state institutions and mental hospitals. One had 4 men who thought they were Napoleon, 2 who thought they were Caruso, 1 who thought he was Tarzan. It was clear, Mara pointed out, that delusions like Mr. Kringle's were not uncommon. This evidence was very damaging indeed. Judge Harper's face grew longer and longer as the trial proceeded. Everyone looked glum except Mr. Kringle. He was even merrier than usual. The reason was Susan's special delivery letter. It had been delivered to him just as the court had reconvened. He read it over and over again. No matter how this hearing ended, he thought, his efforts had not been in vain. Mara continued reading his reports, submitting them in evidence one after the other. Fred sat there, only half listening, desperately trying to figure out something. He was interrupted by a sharp tap on the shoulder. He looked up in surprise. It was one of the uniformed court attendants. He whispered into Fred's ear. Fred looked puzzled and followed the attendant out of the courtroom. Mara was still droning on as Fred returned to his seat. Chris looked at him in surprise. His manner had suddenly changed. He sneaked a confident wink to Chris. Finally, Mara finished. His Honor turned to Fred. "Have you any further evidence to submit, Mr. Gailey?" he asked, in the tone of one who knew the answer. "I have, Your Honor," said Fred, rising. He held a world almanac in his hand. "It concerns the U.S. Post Office, an official agency of the United States government. The Post Office Department was created on July 26, 1776, by the Second Continental Congress. The first Postmaster General was Benjamin Franklin. At the present time, the Post Office Department represents one of the largest business organizations in the world. Last year, it did, I turned 2 pages, it did a gross business of $1,112,877,174.48. In the last quarter alone, it made a net profit of $51,102,579.64. Mr. Mara's patience was wearing thin. It is indeed gratifying to know that the Post Office Department is doing so nicely, he said, but it hardly has any bearing on this case. It has a great deal of bearing, Your Honor, said Fred, if I may be allowed to proceed. By all means, said Judge Harper, grasping at any straw. The figures I have quoted, said Fred, indicate an efficiently run organization, which, alas, is no more. Moreover, it has been an official branch of the federal government since 22 days after the Declaration of Independence. All jobs are under civil service. Promotions are strictly on merit. Furthermore, U.S. postal laws and regulations make it a prison offense to deliver mail to the wrong party. He listed a number of safeguards and forms used by the department to assure the correct and efficient delivery of the mail. Mr. Mara now rose to protest. This hearing had dragged on long enough. Your Honor, he said, the state of New York is second to none in its admiration of the Postal Department. We are ready to concede that it's a most authoritative and efficient organization. For the record? Fred asked. Yes, for the record, said Mara irritably. Anything to get on with this hearing. Then Fred wished to introduce 3 pieces of evidence. From the almanac he took 3 letters and handed them to the judge. Mark them Exhibits A, B, and C, he told the clerk. The letters were addressed to Santa Claus, USA, in a childish handwriting. These letters, said Fred, have just now been delivered to Mr. Kringle here in this building by the Post Office Department. I submit, Your Honor, that this is positive proof that a competent federal authority recognizes Mr. Kringle to be the one and only Santa Claus. The judge took the letters and glanced at them. He was very much impressed. Mr. Mara was not. 3 letters, he said, are hardly positive proof. I understand the post office receives thousands of such letters every year. I have further exhibits, Fred informed His Honor, but I hesitate to produce them. Judge Harper was impatient. The boy had something here. Just bring them in, young man. Put them right here on the bench. Yes, we'd all like to see them, I'm sure, added Mara. His voice was rich with sarcasm. But, Your Honor, Fred began again. I said put them right here, ordered the judge. Very well, Your Honor, said Fred, and nodded toward a door. A long line of attendants came in, wheeling hand trucks loaded with bags of mail. One by one, they brought them forward inside the railing and dumped them before the judge's bench. The courtroom watched the pile grow until the judge's bench was almost overwhelmed by an avalanche of letters. Your Honor, said Fred, every one of these is simply addressed Santa Claus. His Honor looked up from the pile and banged his gavel. The United States of America believes this man is Santa Claus. This court will not dispute it. Case dismissed. Chris stood up. He was smiling happily, but there were also tears in his eyes. Suddenly he grabbed his hat and coat and cane and dashed up to the bench. Thank you, Your Honor, he said, his voice choked with emotion. And a Merry Christmas to you. Judge Harper was beaming broadly. A Merry Christmas to you, Mr. Kringle, he said, extending his hand. His Honor cast a quick glance out at Charlie Halloran. Charlie was chewing away at his cigar contentedly. He gave the judge a happy wink. In the wild excitement which followed, Fred was surrounded by admirers, photographed, slapped on the back, and congratulated, but he could not find Chris anywhere. The reporters wanted the old man, too. They wanted pictures of the one and only, the authentic Santa Claus himself, but Mr. Kringle had disappeared. Well, said one of the reporters, it's 5 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The old boy couldn't be hanging around here. I'll bet he's hitching up the reindeer now. And it's just beginning to snow, too, said another. In the back of the courtroom, Doris rose with the rest of the spectators. She had just slipped in to hear the outcome of the trial. Now she started for the door, then hesitated. Perhaps she ought to offer a word of congratulations to Fred. As she stood there, a couple of reporters passed her. One was handing the other a $10 bill. "Here you are," said the first one, shaking his head. "I never thought he'd pull it off. That letter gag was clever." "It wasn't just the letters," replied the other reporter. "You've got to hand it to that guy Gailey. He believed in the old man right from the start, and before he was finished he had everybody else believing in him too." The point hit home. Doris left the courtyard silently. By now everybody was headed for the door, all except the clerk, who was trying to extricate himself from the mountain of letters that were there only because a little girl had believed in Mr. Kringle and had written him a note to tell him so. On his way out, Mr. Marra mused over what had happened. He knew he should be filled with anger and defeat, but for some reason or other he wasn't. He actually felt rather gay and cheerful. A sudden thought struck him. He hurried ahead, glancing at his wristwatch. "Goodness," he cried anxiously, "I've got to get that football helmet." Chapter 18. On Christmas morning, bright and early, Susan tiptoed into the living room to see the presents under the tree. There were lots of them, too, very excited-looking packages, but not the present, not the one that Chris had promised her. Naturally, she hadn't expected to find a house under the tree, but she had expected some sign or something from Santa to show that her wish was answered. But there was nothing. Mr. Kringle had let her down. Doris came in to find her daughter in tears. Susan's disappointment was bitter. Mr. Kringle wasn't really Santa Claus after all. Doris took Susan in her arms to comfort her, but the child pulled away. Her mother had always told her there was no Santa Claus, and she was right. Susan could see that now. The whole business was a lot of silly nonsense. As she listened, Doris could almost hear herself, and it wasn't pleasant. "I was wrong when I told you that," Doris said. "You must believe in Mr. Kringle, and keep on believing. You must have faith in him. But how could you believe that a poor old man who worked in a store was really Santa and would give you your Christmas wish?" "Faith is believing in things when common sense tells you not to," said Doris, echoing Fred's words as much to herself as to Susan. The child didn't quite understand, so Doris went on. If you didn't believe, you never would get the things you really wanted." Doris had learned that, to her bitter sorrow. Anyone could have faith when everything was fine, but real faith meant believing, rain or shine. She reminded Susan of her letter and how her belief had encouraged Doris. Now the tables were turned, and Susan must believe too. Susan thought it over for a moment, and then began muttering with firm conviction, "I believe, I believe, I believe." The annual Christmas morning breakfast at the Maplewood home was to be especially festive this year, for Mr. Kringle was coming back, the hero of the hour, legally declared sane and therefore eligible to return. Even the board of directors were on hand to greet him, but Chris had failed to make his appearance, and people were beginning to fidget. Dr. Pierce was phoning everybody he could think of, including Jim, the keeper at the zoo. No sign of Chris, and Jim looking out into the yard. But what was even worse, no sign of the reindeer either. When he had hung up, Jim made a wild dash for their shed, and then stopped in amazement. There were his reindeer, sitting down in pairs, panting, their bodies covered with sweat and lather. Jim shook his head. A few minutes later, Chris came walking back into Maplewood. He seemed tired, walking briskly into Maplewood. He seemed tired, but full of good cheer. The greetings were effusive. They were waiting for him to officiate under the Christmas tree, as he had for so many years. But before he could do that, Mr. Kringle had to make a call. He wanted to invite some special guests, if it was all right. Chris called Fred and asked him to do a special favor. Would he get Doris and Susan and bring them out here? "Well," said Fred, You know how things are, Chris." "I know," said Chris, "but on Christmas morning." So of course Fred agreed. Chris, it seemed, had gotten about quite a bit that night. He seemed to have a very recent knowledge of the conditions of all the roads. He outlined a route for Fred to take. The snowstorm had been quite severe. He had better follow Chris's instructions. Fred, with some embarrassment, rang Doris's doorbell. He explained that Chris had called. Were they willing to go with him? Doris's manner was also strained. She tried to be casual in front of Susan, but it was difficult. Of course they would be glad to go. It was a beautiful Christmas morning. The countryside was glistening and white under the brand-new layer of snow. The rather roundabout way, which Chris had recommended, led through pleasant suburban streets. Each house had a gay Christmas wreath in the window and one on the door. Suddenly Susan gave a cry and nearly jumped right through the window of the car. There was her house, her Christmas present. They must stop at once. Fred and Doris looked at each other in bewilderment as he brought the car to a stop. Susan was beside herself with excitement as she ran up the walk. She knew this was her house. It was exactly like the picture she had given Mr. Kringle. With complete assurance, Susan opened the door and went inside. Fred and Doris followed silently, bewildered. The house was empty and gave evidence of recently departed tenants. A broken umbrella, some old overshoes, and a few boxes were scattered about. Fred noticed that there was a small for sale sign on the lawn. By now Susan had seen the second floor and came dashing down the stairs into the living room. She was blazing with excitement. She told them of her Christmas wish to Mr. Kringle, and here it had come true. Each room was exactly as she had known it would be from the plan in the magazine. "Mother, you were right about believing, even though common sense tells you not to. See, I kept on believing, and you were right," she said breathlessly, and with that she was off to the backyard to see if her swing was there. Fred looked at Doris. "Did you really tell Susan that?" he asked. Doris nodded silently, on the verge of tears, and then they were in each other's arms. "Well, everybody believes in Mr. Kringle now," Fred said happily. "It seems to be unanimous." Doris nodded, still unable to speak. "This house made Susan believe in him," said Fred, "and it seems to be for sale. We can't let Chris down now, can we?" Doris shook her head, smiling, and then she finally found her voice. "I never really doubted you in my heart," she said. "It was just my silly common sense." "Well, it even makes sense to believe in me now," said Fred. "It even makes sense to believe in me now," said Fred. "After all, I must be a pretty good lawyer. I took a little old man from an old folks' home and legally proved to the world that he was Santa Claus." Doris nodded, smiling. "You're wonderful," she said. Then something caught Fred's eye. Standing in the corner near the fireplace was a cane, a common ordinary cane just like the one Mr. Kringle always carried. Doris saw it too. "Oh no," she said, "it couldn't be. It must have been left by the people who moved out." "Well, maybe," said Fred. He scratched his head and gave a wry smile. "But on the other hand, maybe I didn't do anything so wonderful after all." The end. That is the end of Miracle on 34th Street. I hope you've enjoyed the story, and we will continue with another story on our next reading day, which is probably Thursday or Friday. God bless you. Have a great night, and we'll see you again then.